Hi, welcome to the Space Camp Software Factory podcast featuring Guardians who push for meaningful change in the Space Force. I'm your host, Gordon Dang, and this is Reverse Polarity. Everyone encounters obstacles, but it's how you face these challenges that determines your character. Today we'll hear stories about a Guardian who demonstrated Semper Supra, which is the Space Force model, and it's Latin for always above. How do you overcome challenges in your office? Today we have our special guest, Major Scott Hubert from Star Command, or also known as Space and Training and Readiness Command, part of the Enterprise Talent Management Office. Welcome, Scott. Glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I'm excited to talk to you, hear about your story, hear where you started from and how'd you end up here. So first, let's start off with, why did you join the Space Force? What made you interested?
Well, I was already in space for the Air Force, and so it was kind of a quick, easy step just to kind of transfer in. But part of what led me over to the Space Force was really the hope that we can take space and the pieces around it and move them forward. The Air Force has a lot of older processes that can make it really effective at certain things, but also make it a little slower. And the Air Force is really focused on the air, right? It's focused on airframes and aerial combat, and space is a secondary piece of that. So, with my background in space and my desire to work in that area, it made the most sense to keep going.
Okay, so it sounds like a very easy transition since you were already doing the space job. Just a matter of signing the paper and then heading off. Okay. What was your FSC?
I'm a 13S space operator.
Okay, what does that mean?
So my career field is largely focused around the operation of space weapon systems. That's ground-based antennas, missile warning radars, missile warning satellites, those types of things. The things that collect data and transmit them somewhere around.
Okay. What challenges do you experience in your work center?
Usually it's just outdated tools, right? A lot of our systems were built, purpose-built, and some of them are much older. Some of them are newer, but they all have very particular purposes. And when we design systems, we don't think about all the extra pieces that go around it very often. So a lot of our tools were either outdated or like old Excel sheets. And so a lot of our challenges aren't necessarily doing the mission, it's recording the effects around it.
Okay. And you weren't given the right tools to do your job, is what you're saying, that it made it a little bit more difficult. Right.
It's not that we couldn't do our primary job, but let's say filling out a report afterwards, all that data is manually collected. Filling out, sending a report from one agency to another, you got to fill out that Word document. All of that's a manual process for the most part.
Okay, yeah, but then the Space Force touts itself as the most digital force, right? The most technologically advanced force. Did you see any of that in the transition?
It was hard at first because we said we're going to stand up a digital force, but then, we didn't have the digital tools to start it, right? And so part of the standing up a digital service is going to actually have to be building a digital service. And that part was kind of lost in translation.
Okay. Did you receive any guidance on that?
The Space Force put out several doctrine-type documents at the beginning, and so we had a lot to start with as far as where's our vision, right? The vision for our digital service, right? But we didn't have any of the tools to start with, also.
Okay. Well, let's tell us about your journey from that transition from Air Force to Space Force to where you are now today at the ETMO office.
So in the Air Force, so I started missile warning, and my first station was a ground-based missile warning radar, and there we started developing some tools to really help us, making sure that we could do the mission more effectively and more efficiently. And then I transferred to space-based missile warning in Colorado. And there we kind of continued that process. And once the Space Force stood up, I went from being Air Force doing missile warning to Space Force missile warning. So not a lot changed day to day, but as the Space Force stood up and more doctrine and documents came out, there was a lot of hype really about, this new service is going to turn into something really cool and interesting and different, right? That process was touted as going to happen tomorrow, but in reality, it takes some time. So as we're working forward through things now, and we're standing up new programs, we're realizing that some things take longer than others, but we're definitely moving in the right direction. It's just taking a little bit more time than a lot of us would have hoped.
Well, of course, yeah. Standing up a completely new service, you would need new doctrine, right, training, a new force structure, and all that was still in flux at that time.
Right, and really, we haven't stood up a new service since 1947. So it's no one remembers that. No one remembers how long it took to stand up the Air Force. So, I think we probably all could have used a history lesson too, right? Like, they didn't just take the airplanes and suddenly the new service is good to go and we're going to go fly and we're going to be great. It took time. It took a long time for all of the aircraft to be transferred over to the Air Force. It took a long time for all of our doctrine and everything to build upon itself. So it wasn't an overnight process. It probably took a decade, right? And so we're 4 years in? We still have 6 more in our decade to really kind of get solidified. And so one of the anecdotes that I used the other day was that in our training, we talk about how teams are formed, and the first stage of really is storming, right? I think we're still in that storming phase of the Space Force, so it's going to take a little bit. Everything's quite not fitting quite right, but we're making progress. It's a lot slower than we anticipate.
Okay, well, then what role does your office, ETMO, have in shaping the Space Force and helping it become better?
So the Enterprise Talent Management Office is focused on the people aspect and the systems around the people. And so we're working on systems like performance reporting and but a major part of that is like assigning people to jobs. And so we're both working on improving the systems, but also making sure that the people are still flowing into the positions that they need to get into.
Okay. So I know you're also part of the Supra Coder program. Tell us a little bit about that and how you got into it.
So the Supra Coder program is it was a pilot project started by the Chief Technology Innovation Office at the Pentagon in Space Force to get after part of the digital fluency of having a digital service. And so having Guardians that understand software programming and how they can integrate that in with the mission set. And that stood up. The first class started in 2020, at the end of 2020. And I joined as part of the first class. So I signed up on a couple of different like message boards and put my application into a couple places to say that, look, I'm interested in software. And for the first class, they pulled that list and just email blasted everybody. And they had about 400 some people sign up for the first class and about 30 got in. And I was lucky to be one of those 30. And so since then, the program has grown a little bit. We have about 200 graduates, maybe about 230 graduates. And the program is highly focused around teaching Guardians to use JavaScript and apply that in what we call full stack web applications. And so we build user interfaces, databases, and then those endpoint connections in between those two places and how we process the data. So I've been lucky to be part of that, and it's been a great program. Again, it's a growing program. It's only 2 years old, or 3 years old now, but it's been a successful thing, I think.
Okay, yeah, I think so, and that's great too, because if you think about it, the Space Force weapon system of choice is really the satellites, right? Space and missiles. You don't really use them directly. You would use software. And sending people through this program and having them understand how software works, how to create software, how different communication systems talk to each other can help people become a better commander. It's like, oh, wait, I know how this system can talk to that system and then make my operations more effective.
Right. The Space Force's biggest weapon is data, right? It's the data and the software that runs the systems that collect data.
Yeah.
And so understanding how that information is drawn in, how we process it, and how we store it, and then how do we utilize it afterwards is a big piece of what the Space Force needs to do. And I think that's a major part of why we wanted to be a digital service. On the surface, digital service is like digital tools, and we're gonna process everything online and no more paper. But when you get down to deeper levels of what digital service means, I think it means a lot more of how do we make sure that we are handling all of our systems. There's no button to push that sends the missile right in space, so our biggest asset in our weapon is data, and so we need to be able to handle that better.
So how has that knowledge from the SDI program helped you with your office or with your work at ETMO?
Right. So specifically with ETMO, we're working on, process improvement. I think that's where a lot of the Supra Coder impact is right now, is not necessarily interacting with the weapon systems themselves. The knowledge helps, and it helps as we grow our people into senior enlisted leaders or commanders. It's going to really help for them to understand data, but our improvement directly to our mission impact really is all in process improvement. And so within ETMO, we're working on improving things like GPC processes, things that are traditionally handled in an Excel sheet, and you're hoping that everybody has the updated copy. Now we're able to build applications that will take in that data and everybody has the same copy, and it's all hosted on the web. So it makes it a lot easier to process all that. For operators, they may not see our GPC processes, right? But what they may see is a Supra Coder improving, how mission logging is handled, right? And so they may be able to see all those process improvements locally.
So it sounds like you got a better understanding of how that system is supposed to work and what the possibilities are in improving operations, right? Because you understand how software works, right? It's no longer this magical hidden secret sauce of, oh, this is how software is made. You actually went through the program and you know how to make a web application.
Right. And so one example I can provide you is that the mission log that we were using in one of my units, it was a network tool, right? It was a web-based application. But with the knowledge grown from the Supra Coder program, I can look back and see how that program is running, and then start looking at, okay, if I wanted to improve this, here are the other opportunities I have to make this application better, because it's how it was designed or how the user interacts with it. We don't just learn in the software development immersive. We don't just learn the how to write code, but we also kind of learn some of the aspects around it. How to develop a user interface and how to talk to a user to figure out, okay, is this process working? And so those are some of the skill sets that we pick up in our training, but also outside of, how do we build better software applications than we used to?
Is there an actual coding career field in the Space Force?
There is not in the Space Force. So for Supra Coders, we do any of our specialty codes or any of our career fields can join the Supra Coders, but we don't have any specifically for coding like the Air Force does, though it's a pretty small group too over there.
Yeah, because I know a lot of people when they get into Supra Coders, they want to actually code full time and try to figure out how to do that versus actually just managing the team or being part of the process.
Right, and so that's something that we're working on. The Supra Coder program is moving from a pilot program to a real official program, and it's going to take some time, but we're working on making sure that when we train people, we use them, and we use them and their training in positive ways. So that part's going to take some time, but hopefully we're going to actually have real assignments, kind of like what I have here. So that all of our guardians that become Supra Coders can get that opportunity as well.
So after the SDI program, did you go through some kind of like internship, work on an actual software application team?
Right. So the first 3 months of our training is the training course, but after that I had a 3-month internship, and so all of our Supra Coders go through a 3-month internship with a software factory or another software team. to learn some more of the, they learn the hard skills, right? They learn the JavaScript, how to code. That's the hard skills in this. But then they need to learn the soft skills of, working as a team, working with a product manager, a user interface designer, and how to take what was a customer's request and turn that into an actual working piece of software. And so that internship really helps with that. I did mine on a software application called Battle Drill with an amazing team, and they taught me a lot of not just how to write code on their team, but also I got to shadow their product manager and their designer and learn some more of the other skills with that. And then immediately after, started up my own software programs with my unit.
Which software factory did you intern with?
With Basecamp.
Okay, yeah. So what was that application that you were inspired to create then afterwards?
So the first software application I tried to create was called Tracer. Acronym doesn't really mean much right now. But the goal of it is to create a little app store of smaller software projects that we could then deploy quickly for Supra Coders and then give them to their units. It didn't really go too far. It was kind of a demo project, really. We created a couple small apps on it, but it was a big experience gain from that because we tried to create crew scheduling and tried to create some other things, link tree replacements, kind of things that we couldn't use on networks. But the core of it was just gaining that experience of trying to build an application and deploy it.
Okay. What inspired you? Were you trying to solve a pain point within your work center to create that application?
Yeah, so the first pain point we tried to solve was crew scheduling. It turns out crew scheduling is a huge problem across the Space Force and probably elsewhere. What we did, though, is part of the pieces that we're trying to learn is how to fail fast, too. So not every project's going to succeed. And so this was one of those projects that didn't succeed. What we found was that crew scheduling was really complicated, and there were available resources out there that were already deployed applications that did a better job than what we were doing. And so we ended up dropping that project for something else that already existed.
Okay. Yeah, and I feel that fail fast mantra is a misnomer, right? Because it's not about failing, it's about learning. Right? Because the more that you try to test your assumptions, yes, you're going to fail, but you're going to learn at the same time. So what are some things that you've learned in that experiment or in trying to create that app?
Part of what we learned was that not everything is going to go to production, right? That's kind of, I feel like something that is lost. Like you're saying, it's not really a failure, right? It's labeled as a failure, right? It didn't finish, right? So it failed, but the thing we learned out of it was that everything that you do, especially within coding, and really every experience that you gain just kind of generically is something that helps you in the future. And so we were able to take the lessons we learned from building it and apply those to the next thing we did, but we also didn't waste a lot of time building something that already existed.
Yeah, I think we need to stop using that fail fast mantra and start saying learn fast. How do we find ways to learn faster?
Right, maybe exit fast.
Exit fast, yeah, exactly. Because the idea is to capture those lessons learned and not really just waste time. So with your first program, I think the next program you started up was DARTS, wasn't it?
Right. So the Delta Analysis Reporting and Tracking System was that one.
Yeah, tell us about DARTS.
Yeah, so DARTS was built off of an idea that we had tested in my first unit. We built this Microsoft Access program called SPADE. And we really modernized, with the tools that we had available, how we processed our mission at that system and saved oodles of time in mission logging. We automated a lot of our processes and created status boards that really saved us a lot of time and a lot of energy building things in PowerPoint. We didn't have to do changeover in PowerPoint anymore, right? We didn't have to send data with Excel anymore. We were able to, print it as a PDF if we wanted. We modernized some of our training and some other aspects. And so we took those lessons learned, but we knew Access isn't the program of the future, really. It was not even Microsoft deprecated it, right? And so we took what we learned from those aspects and said, okay, we need to build an application, a web-based application that we can use to share across all of our units. So Delta 4 was the organization I was a part of. We had 8 squadrons, I believe, spread across the whole globe. And so we need to be able to communicate and share data with all of those. And so a web application is perfect for that. We applied for a grant through the Chief of Space Operations and got $400,000 or so that we put towards web costs and some contracts to get some support, and built, similar to Tracer, like a mission app store, with the first app being mission logging.
Okay. What type of support did you get from your leadership during this time? I'm sure you weren't working this on your own.
No, so I was part of the combat development team for Delta 4, which is like a small flight of people focused solely on innovation, improving mission availability. And our colonel at the time was super supportive. They supported sending me through Supra Coders, and then supported that Tracer app. And then once we had the pitch for darts in hand, they signed all of the memos that we needed to get it going. And so they signed all of the support we needed, gave me additional personnel to get it started. And pretty quickly we formed like a 3-man Supra Coder team to really start getting after it, and provide us access to all the operators that we needed, as long as we weren't impacting the mission, of course, to do interviews and such to really build a better application.
Oh, that's great. So, did you notice, was this a pain point that existed in all the work centers?
Absolutely. So one of the key data points for this was that each of our units was using something else to mission log. And so we would have units using anything from the Microsoft Access tool that we built, which was in the same Delta, down to green books that were used long ago, stamped with a secret stamp, and handwritten in to keep track of everything happening in their mission. And the pain point at the Delta was, if something happened, they needed to collect all of this data from each of the different units and compile it into a single spot. Well, when you receive 8 different formats, it's really hard to compile all that information at once, and it takes hours of extra work to do that, along with the hours it took them to compile that. So if all that data was available on the web, the Delta could pull it whenever they wanted. And so that was the pain point we were trying to solve.
That's great. But what made you want to solve this problem? Right? I'm sure everybody else in those work centers were also experiencing the same issues, and they were just working through whatever tools and processes that they had. What inspired you to step up and say, you know what, I need to solve this for all the other Deltas?
Part of that was being an operator, right? I was an operator at 2 units, so I had experienced those problems firsthand. But the other piece is that, I made a decent operator. I did okay, but where I feel like I can contribute back is making the lives better for operators. And so my big goal, especially being a Supra Coder, is making things better for the operators, and making the mission more effective. And so when I can find a pain point like that, can validate it, and then be able to build an application to solve that, that's where I provide a lot of joy for myself out of the mission. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think we need more guardians like you that want to step up and solve problems for everybody else, right? Because then that would have the full digital force within the Space Force. And really, if you think about it, why do we need software? Why do we need digital tools? And it is all about just solving problems, right? You have a mission to do. You have to get information and data, as I mentioned, from one point to the other. How do you solve that, right? How do you navigate that obstacle by using the tools you have? And I think that's great.
So one point on that is that, I was also really blessed, right? My leadership was super supportive of doing that. And, a lot of our Guardians do want to help solve problems, but, it also takes a leader that wants to make that an option for our Guardians to do it. So I got really blessed that my leadership at multiple stages in my career have wanted to let me solve those problems, but also provided resourcing, right? They didn't just say, okay, solve it if you can, right? They actually provided resources on the back end of that as well. So that's one other part that we need to work on too, is enabling our guardians to also solve those problems if they want to.
Okay, so your leaders saw that passion in you and basically fueled it, so and then gave you the resources and the time, and even put you on a path to allow you to make all these changes happen. I think that's fantastic. But what about on your own? What type of special skills did you have inherently? Did you already were you like a hobbyist coder? Were you tinkering on your own time? Did you just enjoy coding to be able to create solutions?
I would say not at first. So my first, in college, I did terrible at coding. I was a bad coder in college. I got C's, I think. And I think I stole some of the homework from other people, pretty sure. I copy pasted a little bit of code. But before I joined, I got into photography, and I didn't have money to pay for someone to build me a website. So I learned how to build websites. But the tools that I were using were very, old school tools. And so I didn't really understand JavaScript or any of the coding languages, just display languages, right, like HTML. But working with Access, I got a little bit more hands-on coding experience, learning how to use Visual Basic scripts. And then, once I got into the coding course, that's when it really clicked of how to build these things. So something we tell our coders is that you don't have to have any prerequisites. There's no prerequisite to go to the coding course other than, do you have the aptitude to do it? And the best way to test is, give some self-study, pass the test. If you can pass the test, then we think that you have the aptitude to go through the course. So,
oh, that's great. So, but I noticed as an active duty member, one of the biggest challenges and hurdles that many active duty experience is turnover, especially with leadership or personnel within your office. Did you experience any of that? And if so, how did it affect you in trying to solve your problems and even standing up darts?
Yeah, we definitely ran into some of that. Luckily, our leadership, our first Delta commander was supportive, and then our second Delta commander was very supportive. And so that really made that, continuing with the Supra Coders and building upon our lessons and deploying darts, pretty seamless. When your leadership continues to support those issues, it makes it a lot better. We had some personnel turnover, and I had a few people coming in and out of the office, but when you have sometimes referred to like an anchor dev, right? The person that knows all the history and the knowledge and has been with the team for a while, it helps keep that program on track. And so even though we had some people of our programmers cycle in and out, I stayed with the program through for the first year and a half. And was able to keep it going and be that kind of historical knowledge. So that helped a lot.
Yeah, so you were the consistency in that program that kept it going. During this time, you were also working with Space Camp. How did Space Camp support you in your efforts?
So starting with the internship, Space Camp provided a team that was really helpful in getting some experience. But then when we stood up our first Project Tracer, I went to Space Camp and was like, hey, look, I have a project I need to start for my work, but can we be part of your software teams? And so what we started was really a interconnection between our Delta IV combat development team, and our software projects really became part of the portfolio of Space Camp. And so we did that by design so that we could help get some of that support, but also that was something that Space Camp was looking for as well at the time. And so they were wanting to, help the Deltas build software, but we were really a pilot program. Like no one really knew, right, how to do that. And so we kind of stepped out there and said, hey, look, we'll be a software team for you guys. We'll manage ourselves internally, but we'll join all the meetings and make reports up to Space Camp. It became a collaborative effort at that point. So it was really helpful to have Space Camp around to provide a lot of the expertise that, we're junior developers, right? We had 6 months of experience max at that time. And so we didn't know everything. And it was really helpful to have the expertise level that Space Camp can provide as well.
Okay, yeah, because in creating a software application, you're now veering into the acquisitions world, right? There's acquisitions process, right? How do you get a program going? How to get resources? How do you keep it keep it going after you leave? Because I'm sure as an active duty member, you'll PCS as well. So I know that in your developing software, you know what? I'm curious. What type of feedback did you get from your peers and your leaders once your program was going?
Some of the feedback was good, especially those that didn't have anything to start with. Appreciate that you brought them something cool and new and something a little bit more efficient. Those units that already had a program that maybe the new program didn't do as much, it was a little harder for them to want to transition to something that we built. Also, leaders have a bit of hesitancy. As you said, everybody transitions, right? Everybody has to move. And that's just kind of an aspect of the military. So the two questions that I got a lot were, what happens if you leave? And the second question is, how are you going to sustain this? And, I think the second question is a really awkward one because, as a leader telling, then a captain, how are you going to sustain this? Well, I don't own a budget. So, really, how are you going to sustain this, right? And you had to kind of give it back to the leadership of how does the leadership want to sustain this if they want it? But then, there's always, what if I leave, right? And I did eventually leave. But part of it's building the backbone of the documentation and the legacy and, the other pieces that go along this, so someone can take over behind you. And so, both of those have to kind of get worked out as we go. But that was a lot of the feedback we got from leadership. But the Guardians, for the most part, we're excited that someone was working on this problem, right? It's sometimes you think that everything's, space has always been the same, is the kind of the mantra that everything's had for decades, really. Space is always going to be the same. Well, space has changed. We talk about the great power competition now, and space is a huge part of that. And Guardians need to see improvements in a lot of those things, and so Supra Coders are actually helping with some of those pieces.
So how did you build a new champion? Because you've moved on from Dart since then, right? How did you build a new Scott Hubert that was passionate about keeping the program going?
Part of that is just training up the next person. Sometimes you have a choice in who comes behind you, and sometimes you don't. So spending time with them, explaining to them why it's important, and then really getting that replacement into the shop early enough so that they can learn the ins and outs and then follow behind you. If you're lucky, you find someone with some passion. If you're unlucky, you can find someone that it's just the job. But for the most part, I've been lucky at training my successors to make sure and building a program around it. Right? It's not just we're just going to go build software and we're going to have a good time. It's building a program that will sustain itself beyond through documentation and some other aspects.
So getting that buy-in from the next generation is really key. But then I know that you didn't stay idle for long. You decided to create a new application called Uplink. Right? So tell us about where the idea for Uplink came from.
So in the early part of the Space Force, in the early days, there was a lot of communication flowing back and forth between our senior leaders, and they were collecting feedback from Guardians, and we were all very excited about that. But over time, that faded away a little bit. Then it became hard to see what communication was happening, and it was starting to become really hard to communicate with leaders. Right? They used to have, every month or two a town hall. You would see the CSO on Teams and be able to type out a message, and maybe your question didn't get answered, but at least it got in the queue, right? And there were some web applications they put out that would collect feedback on things like the uniform standards. We can stick our hands in our pockets now, and that's a big reason about it, right? Is we put in that feedback. Hey, I would love to stick my hands in my pockets. And all of that feedback was collected and actioned upon at the beginning, but all of that dropped off. And we found it's hard to communicate up and down now. Sometimes there's too many communication apps. Sometimes it's just not easy enough to get to. And so for Uplink, the main goal was providing an environment and a platform that leadership can communicate down to us, but also then we can provide feedback immediately upon it. And so we took cues from Reddit. It's a pretty popular platform in the Space Force. Our Space Force is a very popular subreddit. But as all of our leaders and even a lot of our Guardians will admit, it's not secure, right? It's Reddit. And anybody can join the subreddit. Who knows if there's Chinese actors on there or not, but I would guess there are. And so the goal was to build a secure type of environment like Reddit that has some semi-anonymous capability to it, so that your leaders don't necessarily know it's you that's responding, but also provide an official source for information that your senior leaders could go and post what's going on that day, provide an update on different situations. Sometimes programs get delayed, and we should recognize that that's just a fact of life. But if your leadership doesn't tell you that it got delayed, now you're just sitting there waiting for it, right? But if we had a platform that you could communicate that message out, or maybe they need to ask a question, like an Ask Me Anything, that Guardians could provide direct feedback on. Guardians crave that kind of interaction that wasn't as feasible in the Air Force, but it's definitely more feasible when you have a service of 8,000-9,000 active duty members.
Okay, so you took your lessons from your first application about basically learning fast, and you turned it into a tool now. It's about learning fast is learning the lessons and getting that feedback so that you can iterate and make things better. So, wow, and you create an actual tool to be able to facilitate that. Where do you hope Uplink will go in the future?
I hope that it's something that we can publish and share with everybody in the Space Force, and any of our sister services that interact with the Space Force, right? I'm hoping that it's something that becomes part of our culture. We talk about culture a lot, and learning more about culture. Culture is something you have to build, right? And at the beginning, we had this culture of excitement. We're excited about all the changes. We're excited about being more open and honest with each other. But the honeymoon phase wore off, and we realized that we still have a lot of holdover from the Air Force as far as that goes, right? All of our processes are still the same. All of our, we still follow all the same regulations. But that doesn't mean we can't have communication about it and provide feedback on those things. And so I'm hoping part of our culture becomes that open communication again. And I hope Uplink becomes part of that.
In your career, what advice would you have for young Guardians that were starting off and experiencing obstacles that you have? How do you give them that passion? What advice would you provide them?
I would say just, be clear about what you would like to contribute. I think that leaders really want to know that you want to contribute, and they want to know how you want to contribute. That said, they can't always provide exactly what you want, but the more that you push in the direction that you want to go, the more likely you are to get what you want. And the Space Force is a bit more flexible of service, and so as opportunities come up, and if your leaders know, if the Guardians leaders know that they want to work on something, and the opportunity arises, then that'll be the first person chosen. And so, in my first job, I was like, hey, I think I can make things better. And, I built a demo of it, showed it off to my showed it to my leadership, who showed it to the commander, and the commander said, if you think you can do it, go for it, right? And so we did. And it turned in from an Excel sheet that was more automated to an Access app that did all the things, and then eventually we turned it into a web app, right? And those didn't happen by accident. Those happened through leaders that understood that things could be improved, by Guardians who told their leaders that things could be improved and how to do it. And then persistence, right? You have to be persistent about it. If you say, I think I have a good idea, but you have nothing to back it up with, and you have no drive to do it yourself, it's just not going to happen.
Okay. So it sounds like getting that buy-in is key. Just having something that you can actually prove. Although that is a challenge, right? How do you prove something that you don't have, especially with the demo? But for you, you had that you had that Microsoft Access application that you could show, hey, there's a pain point and this has potential.
Right, and sometimes it's just mapping it out on a PowerPoint. Hey, I think this is how this would work if we made it better. And leaders can be pretty receptive to those kinds of things. Like if you have an idea and you have a little bit of data and you have a little bit of just drive to do it, leaders are pretty receptive to those kinds of things. So if people want to do something, you got to go after it, but you also have to back it up.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that was a great journey in how you went and created 2 applications, and you just have a passion for problem solving. Every day you're going through the daily grind. How do you regain that purpose? How do you feel purposeful within your organization?
Right. And, I think even in my story, right, like I was already a lifer when I got in, right? I was planning on retirement. I saw the money symbols and I thought that's for me. But one of the pieces keeping me in is being able to provide in a way that I think will be impactful. And I think that that's a lesson that we can take for our guardians as well, is that not everybody wants to contribute in the same way, but we're all here to contribute, right? We didn't just sign up on a whim, most of us, but especially with recruitment numbers now, we need to make sure that, not that we're bending to their will, but we also are enabling our guardians to contribute in a way that makes sense both for us and them.
Well, thank you for your story. That was very inspiring. Now, to end this session, let's go into some lightning round questions. We'll begin with the first question. Thinking of any sci-fi movie, what future tech would you like to be real in 10 years?
Oh, I would love the interactability of the tools like they had in Iron Man, where you could just take pieces and slam them together and then just click print and it spits you out. Something like that would be amazing. If you could interact with systems like that, I think that would be something that almost slightly realistic maybe. I don't know how we make the screens in the air, mist or whatever, light projectile on mist, but being able to interact with your display with your hands rather than on the keyboard, I think that'll send us in a next technological jump if we can get that type of interaction.
I think we're kind of close to there because you can access an app from your phone and on your desktop at the same time and synchronize data. But it's that hardware that's kind of getting in the way. And so you're saying, let's get rid of the hardware and actually have the hologram.
Get something, and something that somebody else can see at the same time, right? So I imagine if you're on the ops floor and you have a dozen satellites in space that you're in charge of, where is the sphere with all the satellites around it? And you can click on a satellite in midair and expand it, and everybody else can come in. Where's that display? Because I think that would send, especially in ops, that'd be a big jump in how we interact and understand our weapon space, right? In our war space.
Yeah, that's super cool. And it goes back to what you mentioned earlier about data, management of data and information. That if everybody had access to that data and be able to just pass it from a system to the other, it would make your operation so much smoother and easier. All right, let's see. Next question. What are 3 words that would describe you?
Let's see. Let's go with persistent. Been rather persistent with what I want. Probably obnoxious isn't the right word, though I wouldn't be surprised if that one came up too. But also driven. I really do want to do it, right? And I'm probably persistent because I want to do it. And I've run into plenty of failures and roadblocks. The journey's not always smooth, but I could be obnoxious about it. And eventually, you get the right people to agree to let you do stuff, and you can get in the right direction. So.
Well, like I say, many great inventors have failed 1,000 times before they actually found the right solution.
Yeah, I think, what was it that Einstein failed math, but he's also one of the greatest mathematicians we have, right? So, if we can take lessons from that.
Okay. All right, next. Describe a memorable mentor who helped shape you, and what advice did he or she provide?
My best mentor was, I think he's still a captain, Theodore Khrushchev. He was my first real supervisor, and he took me under his wing a lot when I was a brand new second lieutenant, and he's the one that allowed me to drive a lot of the innovations that we did. And he saw that I had the aptitude and the drive to get after problems, and he created an environment for me to do that. And so he is where I model a lot of my leadership for the people that I've worked with, because I think that if you provide people the environment, that they can succeed. But it's providing that environment that's the hard part. And so, if I had to pick someone I wanted to be like, I don't want to be like him, because he provided just the opportunity for me to flourish. And I think that if he weren't around, that I probably wouldn't have gotten as far as I have.
That's a great answer. Next, if you were king for a day, what would you change?
I would take the Space Force and really instill a lot more agile type principles into the core of our culture, if I could. there's a lot of focus on everything being perfect the first time we do something. And that maybe that comes from missile culture or some other culture, like documentation, right? Put out some documentation. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time. You can overwrite documentation. Software applications. We go through in our first iteration. Someone asks us for a car. Our first iteration might be a scooter. That should be okay, and I think that should be okay in a lot of our aspects. It can't be. Congress is checking up on us, right? So we can't do it in everything, but in a lot of our leadership styles, we should make that be okay.
Okay, so you're saying the agile principle of iterations: start small and then build.
Start small and work up on stuff.
Okay, and be okay to have failure in the
Yeah,
beginning.
and be okay for the first iteration and not be good. If we get frowny faces for the first iteration, that should be okay too. But as long as the last iteration is good, or if it's not good, we scrap it, we start over.
I like that. Next, what should the Space Force be doing or doing more of to ensure digital dominance in the great power competition?
I think part of it is going to be we need to do a little bit better job with our data. We have several data silos that we use. Sometimes they're hard to access. So for building applications as a Supra Coder, I have to jump through a lot of hoops to go and get that data. And just building those applications themselves, I have to jump through a bunch of hoops to find funding. I think that if we had some way to manage the innovation efforts and provide funding for them on more of an enterprise level, along with the data, and make them accessible, I think we could get a lot further, a lot quicker, as far as our combat support. I think, I can't solve satellites, and make everything better in space, but I can take all the ground stuff and the data afterwards and make that better and easier to make decisions quicker. So if we can, find ways to make that process a lot smoother, I think we do a little bit better.
So you're thinking like a tinkering sandbox where people can try things out?
Try things out, but also, when a good idea comes along, it shouldn't take, years to get it funded, right? It should be a decision should be able to be made at a lower level with funding available.
Okay, a tinkering box for Guardians. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, last question. Is there anything else you want to add? I think this has been a great journey, great conversation about different ideas that you have. Yeah, anything else you want to add?
I think I'd just like to thank Space Camp. Space Camp has done a lot of support for us. The Supra Coders in general, they run a lot of the internship program, and nobody's paying them to do it. So that's a huge bonus for us. And it's really coming out of the graciousness of Space Camp. CTIO, the Chief Technology Innovation Office at the Pentagon. There's been some hard spots here and there as people change out, but right now they're doing their best for us. And providing resources and really helping push that digital force a little bit further along. I know that especially as a more, I guess I'm less junior now, but as a junior officer before, it's hard to understand why things take so long to change. But it's great to see that things are changing, even if they're changing slowly, and all the support right there is there. We need more, like I said, we need more resources, we need more funding, but things will come as we prove this out, and I think Guardians are in the right direction. So.
Yeah. And for the record, we didn't pay you. Or
you did not pay me. You did not pay me to say that. No.
Great, you should. I guess that's pretty much it. So what's next for you?
I am working to see if I can get a new job doing program management for Supra Coders. I think that's pretty much my dream job right now, is really taking this program that's helped me so much and really helped me find a way to contribute to the Space Force that I find exciting. And I want to be able to jump into that and then really provide back to the Guardians that are now doing the job and help support them more. In the future, I think that I've got school coming up. At some point, I'll have to go to school, intermediate level education type stuff. But in the short term, I want to really help the Supra Coder program succeed.
Okay. So you want to lead the next generation of problem solvers and make sure that they have the right environment like you did. to really create the solutions. That's a great goal, lofty goal, much needed for the Space Force. Well, Major Scott Hubert, thank you for your time. Really appreciated chatting with you. Really enjoy learning about your story and how you're inspiring future generations of Guardians. And hopefully this story will inspire future generations of Guardians to feel that they can solve their own problems and that there's an environment and there's people like you that will support them as you go up in your ranks. So I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for your service.